Well, welcome back, everybody. I am joined by Bryce. Hi, Bryce.
Good morning, Emma. How are you?
Oh, good. So, Bryce, you're based in the beautiful Tauranga in New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely. Stunning day out there today. So, yeah, we're very lucky to live in this part of the world, as you are down your way.
Yep. Yeah, it's actually not too bad. It's actually quite a mild day. So it's been lovely getting out for a bike ride with the kids and everything else this morning. But we're going to talk everything golf today and a little bit about breathing and muscles, as both of us are physiotherapists and work with top golfers, and we thought it's a good chance to help maybe the golfers that are stuck at home or that are looking at taking their golf to the next level when they get back into normal life, and share some of the knowledge that we have around the way that you can adapt that at the moment and long term.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's get going.
Yeah, cool. So we did talk a little bit before on our other video regarding the importance of why breathing is so important for golf, but I thought we should get a bit more into muscles today, just to give people a bit of more understanding. And I talk a lot about 360-degree breathing, and for me that's a real important part with golf because of, well, for a few reasons. One of them is the kinematics, so the way that your core will actually activate. And I think that's an important one for us to talk about, is the diaphragm, your main breathing muscle, which sits through between your lung cavity and your stomach, or your viscera. That breaks it up, and it's such a big muscle, but it's quite thin. It's actually going from all the way around 360 degrees from the front of your stomach down the side and all the way into your lower back. And this is the reason for it being such an important muscle, is it will influence your back pain and neck pain if it's not doing its right job, which we see a lot clinically. And it makes a big difference to the activation of your core cylinder, including your pelvic floor at the bottom. And that's important for guys too, not just for the ladies.
Yeah.
So what I think is important is actually going back and understanding where that anatomy is. And most of us general Joe blogs, I don't think they would go, oh, where's my diaphragm today? And what's it doing? And am I getting that activation all the way around? Am I right?
Yeah, we touched on it the other day, isn't it? I think people assume everything's fine because they're alive. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, breathing must be well enough at least. So, but no, there's a lot more to it.
I had that I was promoting or sending out information about my golf webinars, and some guy said, oh, I'm nailing it, I'm already alive and breathing. Really is anything else to it. And I'm like, but there is quite a bit to it. Yeah. When you stop and you look at the big picture. And so we talked about breathing being that foundation because it drives the emotions and it impacts the mind. And even things like which part of the brains will be actually firing. So when you're in that stress state, you actually kind of shut down that frontal lobe, which is your problem solving, your planning, your emotions, your all those things that are actually pretty important for golf, really, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, one poor decision, a massive effect, and you never get it back sometimes.
Yeah. And I think what happens from that, and the way I always look at it, is this hijacking system where your body just gets taken over and kind of we move from that safety feeling to trauma or stress. And there's a kind of balancing act people need to work through. So the reason why the diaphragm is so important, it's your main way of telling your body that it feels safe.
Yeah.
And activating that's so important. And most people might be thinking, oh, well, I'm actually breathing through my chest and my belly. I'm doing great. I'm taking big breaths. I'm doing really big breaths, but they still might not be using the full amount of the muscle around the side and around the back, or have the right rhythm and rate. So that's really important to check that they're actually doing that. And I think particularly for the kinematics of rotation, and maybe you can talk a bit more about that, Bryce, in regards to how that impacts golf. Why do we need that thoracic rotation and movement for what we're doing there?
Yeah, I mean, golf's a rotation sport, isn't it? So you've got to gather it from somewhere. And basically, if you've got plenty of rotation, then you've got often enough rotation, but then it'll come down to strength in that movement. But if you breathe up a chest, and it's easy for people to test, you'll lose range. By the time you crank that rib cage up, and you measure rotation between a nice diaphragm breath and rotate versus an upper chest breath and rotate, there'll be a significant loss of rotation. And in terms of a swing, if you can just imagine, without me standing up, if you rotate and you run out of range, then you've got to find range somewhere else. So then people often go into a side bend, which in a funny way actually reduces even more thoracic rotation as well. So you can look at someone and say, well, they're not rotating sufficiently, and you keep trying to deal with that from a purely musculoskeletal or coaching aspect, where really the diaphragm may well have been the critical part to that.
Yeah.
And then working everything off a stable base. So as you've already discussed, that diaphragm, to me, puts the lid on the pot.
Yeah.
In terms of, so if you've got the waist narrowing naturally through that deep core muscle, that TA, then your cylinder's narrowed, as you mentioned, pelvic floor underneath and diaphragm sitting beautifully on top, then you've got a very strong structure that gives you the foundation for the swing. So these movement muscles can relax and unleash. If that system's not working that well, then some of those muscles that should be the movement ones that should be unleashing actually get recruited to try and do some of the holding role. So then it becomes a pretty inefficient movement after that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes it, and that's the talk about what you're saying there in regards to that rotation being blocked. But from the anatomy point of view, if you are taking that big breath in and holding, you actually can't then move the actual joints going onto the ribs, onto the thoracic cage, rib cage easily. It's already expanded, so they've lost that kind of slide and glide that they normally get. So it's learning to get that movement and to be flowing with it instead of that rigidity. Because it's, again, if you're in fear mode, you can kind of go into three different areas. We look at really the main ones is that flight, fight, or freeze. And that freeze mode of definitely, if you're going into that kind of, oh my God, I'm coming up to the ninth hole, this is where I, drove it or hooked it left now, then your body's going to inhale and grip, and then that'll flow through your whole swing and kinematics. And that's because your whole body is just transferring force. That's what it's about. You've got to get that force transfer right. And like you said, if the body will take the path of least resistance, and if something's not moving right, it'll find somewhere else. And then over time, that has a huge impact onto joints, muscles, nerves. And that's when we see people in the clinic, isn't it? It's not the 10th swing they've done that's going to make them feel sore. It might be the 1,000th or the 10,000 that if it's not quite right, that'll be gradually impacting and kind of irritating the body.
That's right. And often it's the reason behind the poor shot. Things have been going okay, and then there's that one shot, and you go, what on earth happened then? And you'll, basically it may well come back to that diaphragm and the way it functioned in that particular swing. And that might have been induced from the mind in terms of the anxiety, the previous experience, or something else snuck in there as well. And as you demonstrate, when the person upper chest breathes, often there's that shoulder elevation. That shoulder elevation kind of change position of hands, and a lot of the work that Mark Bull's done, from his 3D work, top golfers tend to, if I'm correctly here, and I always qualify myself and say, look, I'm not a golf coach, but we work with the coaches, that their first movement is the hands tend to go down, where the club golfer, the hands tend to come up. So if you breathe up a chest, shoulders elevated or popped a little bit, that immediately tells us a little bit, significantly what's happening at the hands and the flow-on effect. So that initial breath and where it is in the swing, because most golfers haven't considered when and if and all the how-dos about where it's happening within the swing itself. So, you can allude a bit more to that.
Yeah, and we do talk a lot about that in the workshop, the webinar as well, because I think that's really important, is depending on where you are, what you're doing, if you're driving off or when you're putting, how that will influence it. Because it's not as simple as just breathing in, breathing out. And what I was going to carry on from there, because I think people, it's good to kind of look at the big picture. But, we see a lot of injuries in the clinic and for the last few years of the old golfer's elbow and tennis elbow. And while people think it's a very local injury, when we're looking at it from the load factor, a lot of people that I've seen have got because of the way that they've been breathing. And this is kind of, people go, what, you're telling me my elbow is from the way that I breathe? But your leg bones lead to your thigh bone and all that sort of stuff, because it's how that kinematics is impacted. And so what I find is that people, if they're upper chest breathing, you actually influence these neck muscles that come through, and your first rib actually gets elevated, and the nerves that flow out into the arm get impacted, and then you change that whole kinematics, which may mean you're actually overloaded and gripping a different way. So it has impacts all the way through the body, including the way that your center of gravity balances.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
That's so important for golf as well. So like I talked about that 360-degree breathing, getting people to posteriorly breathe and getting to expand through the back actually helps to get them into a bit more of a neutral position, and make them go through their, what we call your navicular, or your arch of your foot, instead of it being either too forward on the toes, which is definitely going to throw your swing off and make you feel unstable. And I've seen it when you use the gravity plates in golf as well, when you haven't got that right, and then when you train it up and then you get back on the plates and it's like, oh, that's better. And TrackMan changes as well.
And the balance is important. Is amazing, isn't it? That again in the swing, the pelvis for the top golfers just tends to move away from the ball a little bit. So if the people have got their balance and in onto their toes because of their breathing, well, the pelvis is going to tend to move closer to the ball during that swing. So that happens there. When you get these muscles working, isn't it, you tend to switch off, tends to get that forward head posture exaggerated. And again, most people, if they're listening to this, if they can sit tall and then you sort of go with the flow, but allow that chin to just drop forward a bit, generally you'll feel how it just switches most of these gravity muscles immediately off. So, that concertina effect can be massive. So once you switch.
I was going to say, that's what do you normally do to then help people apart from just feeling it? I've got a wee trick as well that I use people.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, going back to that elevated shoulder, we talked about the thoracic core.
Yes.
So the thoracic core is a term and maybe an area that a lot of people don't necessarily look at. But if the thoracic core is working well, the lumbar core will work automatically. If the shoulders elevate and you upper chest breathe, it is a lot harder to have that thoracic core activated properly.
I think that's such a main point there, because we look at where pain points are in the body. We go, my pain is in my back. That's where the problem is. But actually, the thoracic rib cage, that is where I will hunt into for most of my conditions, because it influences the viscera, it influences the breath, the muscles, the outflow of everything. And you're 100% right there, Bryce, that thoracic core. And I think we'll talk about that in our next video, again, with like tools you can use to help train that thoracic core. Because for me, that is an absolute game changer. And I'm working a lot with golfers to kind of go, look, you need to be aware of that component when you train your body. And a lot of it's that awareness piece as well.
And there's plenty to think about, isn't it, over the golf swing. So you want as much of this happening automatically as it's designed. And if we come back and say, well, how is the body actually designed to do function? And the stuff we've been talking about, that should be just happening automatically. So there's that transition to learn it, from the knowledge to the application, and then making sure it happens. Then grab the club and swing, and it should all be pretty natural.
And then it's enjoyable more than just that kind of that response. And I think I work with a few golfers as well that have had a lot of anxiety, particularly, and some of it's actually stopped their careers. And top golfers playing in the US, and they've had to, that was just the game changer for them. They just couldn't cope with that level of stress with it, and because it just flows into the whole the putting, the everything, if they've not got that control. The other things I say as well regarding the neck posture and positions, one of my favourite tools for anybody in general, Joe Boggs public, to get and golfers, particularly putting, is the tongue position. Have you looked at that before, Bryce?
Tucked up and behind the teeth there.
So roof of the mouth, and then tongue behind the top teeth, and then lips are together but your teeth are apart, and that just softens through that frontal that front neck and jaw. And if you put it down, you'll realize how much it changes. And it's a very small, subtle thing, but when we're looking at people putting, they can change that position, and it actually stops them from going forward and allows them to get back into that center of gravity, which then allows the movement to occur.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that's a great example of, you know, the one key that opens a few locks, isn't it? That rather than, oh, I've got 5 things to think about here, you can go, look, if I pop my tongue, you know, in the position you're talking about, then it tends to flow on and solve a few of those other things anyway, doesn't it?
that's a great point, because I mean, you can't do 10,000 things with a golf swing. You've got to actually either focus on, you know, 1 or 2,
Yeah.
and otherwise you're just going to be throwing it all out. So, and definitely I found that with the pro guys. You know, I'd give them one thing for either a few holes if we're doing a practice round, and then we'll switch it up. And then once you get better at it, becomes automatic, and you're not even thinking about it. But if you know then something's not going right, you come back to those as your anchors.
Yes.
To get your posture and get your body right, because you can't change it all within a few rounds.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it before around the triggers as well. It may take months to become very good at it, but you may be doing nicely, but there'll be a trigger. You know, there may be an anxiety or something's happened, and you go right off the boil on it.
Yeah,
and you've got to bring it back. You know, rein it back in again. So. Once you've made it, doesn't mean that it's a constant from there on. You may have to keep, you know, revisiting and working a bit harder to re-establish, I guess.
100% agree with that one, Bryce. And because, you know, I've seen the impact of the stuff that happens outside of the golf course. So while you could be having, and it could be happening on the golf course where you have that that bump in the road. We've got lots of analogies going today with turnkeys and bumps in the road and lots of like it. We'll see when more we can get in. But I find the stuff that happens, like the big life things that happen along the way, whether it can be marriage, it can be loss of family, grief. Grief's a big one, and we don't always identify that and see how that comes through and then flows on to the emotions and then for into your golf and swing. So, you know, if you're happy off the course, you're going to be happy on the course. But if you're not, then that will really impact it.
Yeah. Well, the one I always wonder about too is, you know, you watch on TV and the player is going to the 4th round, they're leading and it's fantastic. And because of this, the families come in, you know, they're playing on their home course. The families arrived and as lovely as it is, and they get interviewed and say, looks fantastic. They have this home club support and, you know, the fact my mum and dad came along to watch and everything, it's just brilliant. But man, what an additional stress potentially that can have. So, you know, the good news stuff can add its stress as well, isn't it?
I mean, that's the fascinating for me was watching golfers go through a 4-day tournament and like the highs and the lows of it. And, you know, people could do 2 days going great and then like make the cut and then bottom out. And you're like, what happened? And they're like, I don't know, just something just went the right. And you just did such an interesting roller coaster with that. And, you know, the whole making cuts and the pressure of that and financial and that high end of golf. But you're so right, like that top end piece where it's just, you've got to get that fine tuned with how you're going to respond to stress. And that's that bandwidth and building up your resilience and tolerance with it. So even though we're going to talk about muscles today, you know, it still comes back to trigger psychology and the big picture stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things I was going to say, and we'll talk about that a bit more with the next video in regards to thoracic core and then core as well, and things you can use, is that diaphragm muscle is like any muscle. It needs to be strengthened and trained. You know, if you've had an ankle injury, you strengthen your buttock muscles, you strengthen your leg muscles to get feeling good. Yeah, so we're going to go into that next time. And the powerful thing with the research, because this is not us just making the stuff up. Like there's a lot of great research in the breathing, anxiety, sports performance, and one of the research that I just always blew my mind was done with. I don't know if it was cyclists, but it was done using the tool that you just showed, the Power Breathe. So what they call inspiratory muscle training, so diaphragm and breathing muscle training. And they did strengthening with this for just 30 breaths twice a day over, I think it was 6 weeks. And they found that from that start point to that end, that the diaphragm thickened by 13%, which is a significant amount. And what we know as well from looking at ultrasounds of diaphragms, that muscle, it can actually be weaker on one side than the other. If you've had injuries and performance, back pain, it changes the position of your diaphragm from being that lovely dome to actually being elevated which is a lot to do with that inhale and protecting and bracing. So there's
and you can measure the K5 I've got here, in terms of measuring the strength of the diaphragm. So you can be reasonably, subjective.
And see a change over time with that training. So that's really powerful. But first and foremost is get the pattern right first, which is what we train and teach when you're in clinic. It's a big part of what I teach in my golf webinars, because again, we just like holding a mirror up to people. We're often very unaware of our own patterns in all parts of life, but particularly with the breathing and then with golf. So it's about understanding your own pattern, because it's not actually a one size fits all model.
No, it ebbs and flows, and people have, like you talk about breathing rate, isn't it? Preferred breathing rate. There's a variety in there that suits each person, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we'll leave it at that for today. It's a lot of information to kind of start thinking about and being aware of their breath, being conscious that it's a different way of doing it. And then let's gather back again and let's talk about some tools people can use, both for the amateurs and the pros. We've got lots of different things that people use on the go.
Cool.
So thanks, Bryce, again for joining me.
Yeah, it's great chatting, Emma. See you soon.